Hey, good morning. How's everyone today? Welcome to another episode of Wake Up and Ship More. I am your host, Joe. We have a good topic today. I think that is relevant to anyone who is building at any stage, really, but especially people who are ready to go to production. And we're going to talk a little bit about decision making, especially after you have something in production, like what happens after that. And I'm going to use a couple examples from my own experience that I think are really relevant. Before we get started, a couple things here. Um, so I put at the bottom here, if you are looking to join the conversation, if you're watching the replay and you have questions that you can't ask during the show, you can always go to the Telegram group and ask there. You're always welcome to have a discussion there. So I encourage you to do that. At any time during this episode while it's live, you can always ask a question in the comments, no matter what platform that you're on. You can certainly ask a question. More specifically, if especially if you're watching on like say YouTube or Twitch, that's an easy place to put something in the comments, and you can ask a question there. I'm always happy to jump in and take some of those questions as fast as possible. Uh, Also, if you haven't signed up already, so let me pull it up here so you guys can see it here. I have it, and I think if you're not already signed up for the DevHub newsletter, I really encourage you to um, check this out. Not only do we have a lot of great resources for developers in the near ecosystem, but we also have just events that are coming up. So if you're looking into different hackathons and stuff like that, I think that's a great place to get some more information from. And then yesterday, if you were following along the DevHub Twitter account, you would have saw that we did a kind of introduction to the redacted hackathon. So if you need some more information, check out that hackathon. $500,000 in prizes that they're going to be there. So I think that's an awesome opportunity for people to build and check things out. We talked all about what's going on there, so you can check out that replay. It's on the Near Protocol account, as well as the Near DevHub accounts as well. So you can check all those things out. So let's get a little introduced into the topic today, and let me talk a little bit about like what I mean when I say mistakes happen, and why this is really relevant for anyone shipping and building. And like when you get to that point of, I have a product in production, I have users using it, and I need to make a decision about maybe growth. I need to understand maybe why things are leveling off, which happens a lot. So you could, even if you start off with like a bang, you start to see like this like leveling off that can happen. And so I think that's like I think for myself especially, even I always try to understand it's like not just about having like great growth, it's about having you know growth that is sustainable, and also that growth that where if I need to pivot or if I need to make a change, I can really understand what that change is. So a couple things there that I think are really worth considering. So let's kind of jump into this topic here a little bit, and I'll explain a little bit further. So let me set the stage here a bit. So I want to use two examples from my previous work that I think are like super relevant to what we're trying to do, what we're talking about here. So first is I'm gonna talk about an example where we're in production. We had made a software choice, and by software choice we mean like how we're going to architect it, who our user base is going to be, and then we shipped. Then we're talking about like one that was already going and then became kind of stagnant, and then we'll talk about that. So the first one here is, so we had something in production, and I'm not gonna name companies or apps, but this one I was actively working on myself, and we had chosen to ship. And so when we were choosing how to ship and how to approach the product, we had pretty much, you could argue anywhere between like 3 and 5, we'll say user types. Okay. And I don't want to say personas because, the term personas is sometimes used in a way that is often used in a way like it's, this is a kind of user that's coming in and using it. And, and you could have people who fall into different buckets of your persona that are that might be different types. These are like explicit types. Like, for example, so if I'm doing like a healthcare app and I have like doctors and nurses, like those are two different types, right? So it's not just, and then within them I may have personas, like the doctor that is too busy, the doctor that doesn't understand technology, the doctor that loves technology, like those are personas. So these are user types. And so you could argue that this product had anywhere between 3 to 5 user types, depending on exactly how you wanted to break things down. Pardon me. That's the tricky thing with doing things live is, there we go. Anyway, so 3 to 5 user types. And really when we shipped, again, so following the principle that I've talked about on previous episodes, especially around like MVPs, is like I have to really think about from here of like when I'm gonna ship my product, I can't go to all 5. Like that's just not happening, right? So we really had to pick anywhere between, you know, obviously like 1. I mean, 3 is stretching it in the beginning, especially as like a MVP. So really like 1 to 2 is the sweet spot. So like that has to come down to that. And we made a choice, and like we made a real specific choice that out of this, like we chose one particular group, and we chose one group to go after, because we felt like that was the largest impact for what we were trying to build. So we thought that picking a particular user type, it was the path of success, because that user type would have the most success from it. And I would argue to this day that that concept and that theory for that product was 100% correct, except, and this is why I think software is hard, and sometimes you have to be able to do both the business part of this, and you have to understand what you're building. Except out of these two groups that we could have, these two paths that we could have really went down. So if we chose, we'll say we chose path A, okay? And so A is like, we'll say this is the like largest, impact. Okay. The problem is that group 2, which is like group B, are the ones that actually pay for it. Okay. Because this app was actually, so you may hear this term sometimes, right? So you may hear a term called like B2C, right? Which is like business to consumer. So any consumer based app is that, like, right? So like your social media apps, those are consumer apps. So those are B2C. This is usually used a lot in like SaaS based stuff. There's also B2B where you're like selling to businesses, right? Um, so business to business. We had this, right? B2B to C. So we were selling. So this is who was paying for it, but this is who was impacted. This is who was like one of the main users. The challenge became is that we saw this impact. We, as this first part of this company, we were as the main business, we saw that the group A was getting the largest impact out of our product, but they were not the ones that would pay for it. And in changing to a consumer only app would not have worked, because the data sources that were driving this app had to come from the businesses themselves. So it was based on business intelligence data. And so we really needed to be able to do that. So now, the sales is always going to go to that next step of that other business. So when that happens, person who's paying for your product is going to have different expectations of return investment and impact and everything else than you would if, again, the example would be of like, again, if we know the consumers are really impacted by it. They're the ones that are maybe using the app the most. They're the ones that are more directly benefiting from it. But since they're not paying for it, you know that there's no like calculated of our ROI because they're not paying anything. For the ones that are paying for it, the business part of it, right? So B2B part of it is they're the ones who are saying, well, we're not seeing an impact because maybe it's not driving more business for them, or maybe there's other issues. For them in this situation, what happened is that the feature set. So when we talked about building out feature set, okay, were not as robust as they needed to be for the group B. Okay. So the features were really, all focused on, they were focused on A. And we saw that group A had, like good growth, right? So like it was, like that user number kept going up. But that growth was not directly translating to B. So like B was not seeing, like, in B's mind, like the way that they thought about it was that like group A was always going to be there because group A was part of B. So again, here's how this goes, right? So again, let me simplify it already. Okay. So here's the app. Okay. Here's the business that we're selling to. Okay. So here's the biz. Okay. They they already have their users. Their customers, right, are the ones using the app. So here's the customers, right? So I'm just gonna put a C there. Okay. So we're selling to them. They already have these customers. So like yes, again, the app was impacting here, but this is who's paying. So we made the mistake here. So going, the whole episode is about mistakes, right? So we made the mistake. We focused here. So we started to see this part slow down, and we started to see even some churn over time because they were like, well, this isn't helping our business necessarily. Yes, it's a nice to have because our users like it and our users are using it, but it is not providing direct value for us, which is frustrating because we could see the impact. We saw directly that this was working, and we heard anecdotally, and we heard from reviews and from feedback and everything else that like, hey, this is actually really relevant and working well. Like, can we continue to do this? And and can you expand these features? Except we couldn't, because we couldn't keep spending money on building more stuff for this group because they weren't paying for it, and this group that was paying for it wasn't overly enthused. They were like, this is fine, this is great, we're happy that our users are excited about it or using it, but it didn't really move the needle much for them, right? So what we had to do is we had to then recognize that, and we had to pivot. Okay. So this went out the window, and we had to go to focus on B. Okay. And what happened is now all of a sudden that changes the perspective completely of how you start to build your feature set. Because even though we had features for group B, they were minimal because, again, the original concept where we saw impact was building around A. But as a business, if we wanted to keep growing, and this is really important to consider, if we wanted to keep growing, if we wanted to see, the ability to, stay open as a business, the ability to, hey, could we eventually recapture part of this group here? then what would have to happen then is we'd have to say, look, these new features have to be focused on group B. And that was a huge pivot. And that was something that, again, when I'm talking a lot about like being reflective, right? And I showed those charts a couple episodes back of like thinking through your products and thinking through the flow of all that. Like that's amazing, right? Like that's a great way to look at it. But like what happens then from there is like, okay, you know, I that's all well and good if you feel like this is making the largest impact. But if group B is the one that's paying for it, I have to focus on them. Even if that's not the product that you like. And if you really don't want to do it, then you're going to go out of business. You're not going to make money. You're not going to have that revenue. So you have to really be conscious. So this whole thing really goes back to like, and I'll put this here. It goes back to the user types. I need to recognize and understand like who my user types are. And that's where, like, again, for myself, I'm really trying to best understand when I'm designing a product or I'm consulting with another group of like who is actually going to use it, but secondarily, who's the one that's paying for it? How are the things getting paid for? Now, if you are an ad-based model, some of this goes out the window, but not really. Okay, so if you're an ad-based model, it's the same idea here. Because now I'm still serving, and this is important to recognize for your own behavior when you're using apps that are ad-based, is I am building for the ad revenue. So think about social media, right? So even if the product is ad based, like where social media wants you to stay on the app, wants you to keep scrolling, keep looking at content, so that way you can actually see more ads, so they can make more money, right? So that's how they go. So your user type there is like, hey, my user type actually is, users who see ads, and so I need to actually, optimize for users who are seeing ads. It doesn't. Again, it really comes down to as soon as you get out of the experimental phase, and as soon as you get out of the phase of like, I am not just building an MVP anymore. I am actually, trying to build a sustainable business. I have to understand who that user type is, and it's not just about the largest impact. Okay, because that's the mistake that we made. That was the mistake that we made. We lost probably, I would say, a year to 18 months, maybe more, because we were hyper focused on building impact that, again, we thought was going to continue to drive growth. And it was impactful for that group, that user group, that group A. It was impactful for, but they weren't paying for it. Group B was paying for it. And so we had to change our feature set to be focused on, no longer on A, on B. And that was about, again, like an 18-month, maybe 2-year pivot to get to that point. And then once we started to focus on that part of it, we saw much better growth. Like that was, and that's, we saw less churn. We saw higher engagement from the other business. So again, if you're selling business to consumer, right? So the B in the middle there, so business to business is what you're concerned about because they're paying the bills. They were the ones that were much more satisfied. They started to see the return on investment because we were building, feature sets that matched what they needed. It became a tool for them. And then secondarily, this group A, had some stuff available to them. I will argue that, in this scenario, Group A still had some good benefit from it, but eventually became stale over time. There was very limited growth there, and I mean almost no growth, at some points because, really what happens is that you just, again, it gets stuck because they're not paying, and so they're not a priority. So as long as it's working for them, because like they're going to report back to the business saying, oh yeah, your app is great, whatever, So a lot of times, like our reviews, we would see consumer reviews, and consumer reviews went from like, this is great to like, this is fine. Like it wasn't like being rated as poor or, like a bad experience. It was fine. And so that's tough. And that was not, again, the original mission of the business. So that made some of that a challenge as well. So that's example one. Okay. And so I think that's a good lesson there of making that mistake of who your user type is to begin with. Now, example two. I want to frame a little bit differently. So in this example, I am not the direct builder. Okay, I came in as a consultant. I came in to look at where a product was. The product had been up and running for, I want to say, almost 2 years already. They had revenue. They were strong because they were a growing business. But the actual product itself was somewhat stagnant. And they really actually were hitting a wall where they were getting users who were reporting that, like, so the app was built into two parts. There was like an IRL component, and then like, so that actually involved, like, human interaction, and then there was the actual software piece of it that was done on their own time. And a lot of the reporting and feedback from the users was that, I love the IRL stuff. The software stuff is not as helpful anymore. It's not as relevant, not as helpful. They just kind of, again, it just kind of hit a wall where it wasn't serving what it needs to serve. But the software was a large component of the business, and really to get growth and to be able to scale, because human time is not scalable very well, was the software. So when I came in, you had a full feature product, and from there, that's something that, I really, I want to emphasize that, that having a full feature product to start is a great place, because it gives me information. So here I am, right? So here they're starting, and here's their app. Okay. And what was nice is they had almost 2 years of data. Okay. And that data included, and this is why I talked about this in previous episodes, like, you need to be able to collect some of this information of, like, how is your product being used. Again, even if you're building in Web3, in crypto, like, you need to understand, it's not enough just to look at, like, transaction data. You need to have an understanding of how your app is being used, and like, when do people come and go. And I'm not, you don't have to collect all the same information that comes from, like, Web 2. You don't have to be invasive, and you don't have to track users, like, across other things. But, like, you're within your right to, like, understand your users, and so you have to log some of the stuff. You can do it completely anonymously. It's not about, like, who the user is. It's the collective of how things are being uh, done inside your app. So from here, right? So I have this 2 years of data, how it's being used, and so that was, like, hugely beneficial. And then, we had the two pieces of this. One is the actual interface, okay, and that's a direct, like, piece of software that, like, you can work with, like, a UI team and UX team, and you can have your developers build stuff out and address things. But then there was also, like, a second piece of this that was, like, content, right? And so you say, okay, we need to maybe rewrite some of the content, things like that. And that's sometimes a little bit harder. So, like, if you're on the development side, the content piece is a little bit tricky at times to address. But in here, and in this example here, is that, like, you know, we knew we could cover the content if needed. Like, we knew we could change that. So we had to go back and change the interface. And what that allowed us to do is actually kind of experiment a little bit here, where, could we serve the same content in different ways? So, like, could you A/B test? Okay. Even though we had all this anecdotal data, talking to users and actually having, user interviews was, like, super helpful. And this is, I will say, it can be time consuming. If you hire an outside service to do it, it is wildly expensive. But I don't, if you are a startup, or a small business, I highly encourage you not to outsource this ever and do this yourself. Because to actually have the conversation with your users and do the user interview yourself, especially if you can get them to actually like do a screen share and like walk through the product with you and have a user explain their issues or their concerns or what they like, don't like, it's amazingly powerful because you get to get out of your mindset of like you're just trying to ship a product, and you get to see like how people are actually doing things. So the trick here is, we went through all of this stuff. Now, here's where the mistake was made. Okay. Uh, in all of the user interviews, okay, it was that the interface and the process like was not engaging enough. They never felt like they were prompted to keep going. So again, if you have something that's content driven, like you start seeing, that's why like so much stuff is like gamified now, because users especially want to feel like they're building towards something. So we started to design out some parts of this that were more focused on being gamified, right? Okay. And like I think this is a huge part of it. The problem was here. Okay, really. The end of the day is that the content was not strong enough for what it was. And this is where this is where the mistake was made. All of the feedback was here about the gamification and not really about the content. And the reason why our in user interviews and in getting feedback, nobody talked too much about the content per se, is because they didn't know any better. So like they were coming to this product to learn something and to gain knowledge and to, do their, work on different parts of their life. And, it was around like productivity, things like that. So they didn't, most, I would say 99% of the users didn't know any better of like, oh, this content isn't strong enough. It wasn't until we pretty much had designed all of this out and really, I mean, spent a good amount of time and effort of looking at these changes that we came to the conclusion that actually, like, this is part of the problem. The content structure, both, so, and this was two parts. It was both like the what it was, and then like the structure of it was a big piece of it, was a big problem part of it. And this was actually harder to address because you need to have people who are experts in this to actually write this content and develop it. And, you could knock this out with a few developers, pretty quickly. And we were able to make some pretty substantial changes, I would say within a couple months that did, I would say that it did show growth and did show retention, but really it instantly hit a plateau again, because the content was the problem. The content was causing the issues. And so the mistake again here is, so the first time, right, the first example, it's about picking the right user type. And here it's understanding your product, of what is actually driving your product. So let me compare this to something maybe a lot of people have used before. Duolingo, the language learning app, right? So yes, they are like gamified to the max, right? Like everything is gamified. It's all to drive you back to using the app every day. It will bug you. It will nudge you. It will do all different things. It will, it gives you those like casino vibes at times with the sounds and the pop-ups and the excitement and everything else. But the problem then that would happen for them, if the content was terrible, again, this is arguable. I know some language people don't love it, but again, if the content was really bad, then people would just still go because you would feel stuck. And if you look at some reviews for people who do not stay long term at Duolingo, it's usually because they felt like they weren't learning enough. The content wasn't strong enough for them. Something was missing out of that. It's not the gamification. It's not the user interface. It's not any of that necessarily. Sometimes it might be. Some people might be put off by that, but really ends up being the content. It's the same thing here with what we were facing of like we could do this until for the next 2 years. We could just gamify everything. Everything could feel exciting. We could hit the dopamine all day long. But until we got to this part, then and address the content, we were stuck. Once we did, there was a big change, and we saw again another growth spurt, and we saw people really being able to appreciate and understand our product more. Uh, Churn went down, more signups came in. It became something that was, again, if we had recognized it earlier, we could have got to it earlier. So again, to get to this point, again, like this was recognized within like 2 months, right? Like, and so we had changes out the door within about 4 months. This took almost a year. And so, and if we had been able to recognize that earlier, we maybe could have cut a few months off that, maybe even more. And so that could have been, that would have been interesting to see how that went if we caught that earlier. That all being said, I want to, wrap up here and just say, like, I want to encourage you to really think about your product. And I want you to understand that when things are not going well, if things are problematic, if things are stagnant, if your feedback is mixed, you need to accept that mistakes might have been made. You need to look at what you've been building, why you've been building it, who that audience actually is, and what could you do to actually change this. And that's where I'm hoping if you're following along and you've seen the other episodes, like these pieces are all kind of coming together, right? So like the reflection of like I am charting out my features, I'm understanding who my user base is, I'm pulling all these parts together to actually now build something that is sustainable, all fit together. And so today, talking about like when you make a mistake and how you then pivot is important. If we never recognize those mistakes in both those examples, both those businesses are out of business, within a year or two. Both exist today. So that's something that, you have to be able to say, okay, we made a mistake. This isn't working the way we expected it to. We have a problem and we have to address it. If you don't want to, if you want to be stuck in your way and you say, no, like, this is what I want to build. I believe this is what I want to build. And you're not making progress. Like, I hate to say it, like, no matter how cool tech it is, it's going to die because nobody's using it or nobody's paying for it. So you have to balance these two things, and you have to take that time to understand, here's the mistakes that we made. It's okay. We're going to accept them. We're going to remediate them. We're going to figure out how to fix them, figure out what went wrong. And then from there, we're going to keep building. If you please ask questions in the chats. I really appreciate everyone coming by. You can always join the group after the show. That's something that, always happy to answer questions there. If you watch any of the recordings, if you're watching this on replay, please join the conversation there on Telegram. And I think that's a great place to start. We will be back next week with some more building stuff. I really want to keep focusing on, again, how do you understand your product? And we have some other things I want to dive into, some examples that I think are really relevant. If you're watching this today live on Thursday, later today, through the Near Protocol main account, there's going to be a show there. So normally we have DevHub Live. We're going to combine with Near Protocol for a big show and announcement. So follow along there. But otherwise, until then, keep building, keep asking questions. And I'm excited to see what starts to come of this for people. So please reach out to me. I'm always happy to, give some feedback or whatever else, or see if I can help you out or point you in the right direction. But until then, have a great rest of your week and keep shipping. Bye.